Before we begin, if you're drawn to stories that explore the darkest corners of the universe, tales of survival, adaptation, and the clash of ideologies, then subscribe now. Each case file we present delves into incidents that defy explanation, stories pulled from the shadows of forgotten wars and impossible encounters. You won't want to miss what comes next. Now let's proceed with Case File 17 Gamma. The subject: a warrior from a distant galaxy, thrust into the nightmare of the 41st Millennium. This is the account of Obi-Wan Kenobi's arrival in the age of the Imperium. Cold, that was the first sensation. Not the sterile cold of cryo-sleep or the gentle chill of a meditation chamber, but something invasive. Wrong. A cold that felt like it was seeping into his very soul. Obi-Wan Kenobi's eyes opened. Darkness greeted him, broken only by flickering red emergency lights that painted the corridor in shades of blood. He lay on metal flooring, his body aching in ways he couldn't immediately place. The air tasted of burning incense and machine oil, an acrid combination that made his throat constrict. He reached for the Force before conscious thought could catch up. What he found made him go very still. The Force was there. He could feel its familiar presence like an old friend's hand on his shoulder. But beneath it, around it, pressing against it like water against a dam, was something else. A screaming ocean of raw emotion and madness that seemed to claw at the edges of his consciousness. Every time he touched the Force, that other presence noticed, turned its attention toward him, tasted him. For the first time since he was a youngling, Obi-Wan felt genuine fear when reaching for the Force. He pushed himself upright, his Jedi training asserting control over his racing heart. Assess the situation, understand the threat, act with purpose, not panic. His last clear memory surfaced through the fog, the mission to Korriban with Anakin, investigating reports of a Sith artifact in the ruins of an ancient temple. They'd found it, a crystalline structure that pulsed with dark side energy. When they'd attempted to contain it, the artifact had detonated. He remembered Anakin shouting his name, remembered reaching out to shield his former Padawan, remembered light and darkness consuming everything, and then nothing. Until now, Obi-Wan's hand found his lightsaber still clipped to his belt. Small mercies. He thumbed the activation stud and blue light flooded the corridor. What it revealed made his breath catch. This was no Republic vessel, no separatist cruiser, nothing from his galaxy at all. The corridor stretched before him like the nave of a cathedral, easily 20 meters high. Gothic arches soared overhead, their stonework carved with obsessive detail. But the details themselves were disturbing. Skulls worked into every surface. Human skulls, their empty eye sockets seeming to track his movement. Two-headed eagles clutched lightning bolts in their talons, repeated endlessly in bas relief. Scripture covered every available surface, written in a blocky script that hurt to read, as if the language itself carried weight. Everything here worshipped death and authority in equal measure. Obi-Wan moved forward cautiously, his lightsaber held in a low guard. The silence was oppressive, broken only by distant mechanical sounds, the hum of failing power systems, the groan of stressed metal, the wheeze of air recyclers struggling to function. Then he heard footsteps. Not the measured tread of a guard or the hurried pace of someone fleeing. These were shuffling, uneven, accompanied by the whir of servos and the wet sound of flesh moving against metal. The figure that emerged from the shadows made Obi-Wan's stomach turn. It had been human once. Now it was something else. The left side of its body was almost entirely mechanical. Crude cybernetics fused directly to flesh with no regard for aesthetics or comfort. Cables ran through skin that had calcified around them. One eye had been replaced with a glowing red lens. Its mouth hung slack, jaw augmented with metal fixtures that held it permanently open. The servitor, for that's what some deep instinct told him it was, shambled past without acknowledging his presence. It was performing some maintenance routine, its withered fingers manipulating a corroded panel with mechanical precision. The human part of its brain was long gone, Obi-Wan realized. This was just meat puppeteered by machinery. He'd seen war. He'd seen the horrors the Separatists inflicted on clone troopers. He'd witnessed the cruelty of the Sith. But there was something uniquely disturbing about this casual dehumanization, this reduction of a person to a tool. Obi-Wan found a working terminal deeper in the ship. The interface was baffling at first, covered in purity seals and devotional inscriptions, with controls that seemed to require specific gestures, as if operating a machine was a religious ritual. It took him precious minutes to coax it to life, and when he did, the information it provided was worse than unhelpful. It was impossible. The date made no sense. The calendar system was completely foreign. But by cross-referencing multiple logs, Obi-Wan came to an inescapable conclusion. If the records were accurate, tens of thousands of years had passed since anything resembling his era. The star charts showed constellations he'd never seen, sector designations that meant nothing, references to wars and conflicts on a scale that dwarfed even the Clone Wars, and everywhere, in every log, every communication, every scrap of data, there were references to the God Emperor of mankind, not a president or chancellor, not even a dictator in the traditional sense. A god, worshipped, prayed to, venerated with a religious fervour that made the Jedi Order's reverence for the Force look like casual interest. One log caught his attention. A personal entry from someone identified only as crewman 3rd Class Hendrik. Another 6 workers lost to the processing plant today. The flesh is weak, but the Emperor's machines are eternal. Their bodies will serve better as servitors than they did as men. The Mechanicus assures us this is a blessing. I try to believe them. I try to see it as mercy. But when I close my eyes, I see my brother's face, and I remember he failed his quota by only 12 units. Only 12. Was that really worth? The entry ended there. Obi-Wan sat back, his mind reeling. Where was he? What kind of society reduced human beings to components for failing production quotas? The ship shuddered violently, throwing him against the console. Alarms began to shriek, their pitch designed to inspire terror rather than merely alert. Red lights shifted to strobing amber, and somewhere deep in the vessel's guts, something exploded. The terminal flickered, displayed a single word in High Gothic before dying. Borders. Obi-Wan was already moving, his lightsaber ready, reaching out with the Force to sense what approached. What he felt stopped him in his tracks. This wasn't soldiers. Wasn't even criminals or pirates in any conventional sense. This was wrongness given form, malevolence so pure it felt almost innocent in its completeness. These beings loved causing pain the way a child loves playing, with absolute commitment and no understanding that it could be otherwise. And they were coming his way. The chanting reached him first, words in a language that made his ears ache, syllables that seemed to squirm in the air like living things. The sound carried weight, pressed against his mind, tried to find purchase in his thoughts. Obi-Wan centered himself, drawing on decades of Jedi discipline. He would not panic. He would assess, adapt, overcome. Then they rounded the corner, and his resolve was tested. The boarding party wore armor that might have been Imperial military once. He could see the remnants of proper design beneath the corruption. But every surface had been defaced with symbols that hurt to look at directly. 8-pointed stars, blasphemous scripture, crude drawings of acts so vile that Obi-Wan's mind refused to fully process them. They carried weapons cobbled from scrap and madness, axes with screaming faces welded to their heads, guns that wept oil like tears, blades that whispered promises in voices only the wielder could hear. But it was their leader that commanded attention. Tall and rail-thin, he moved with a predator's grace. His armor was decorated with flayed human skin, carefully preserved and stitched into patterns that suggested both artistry and insanity. When he spoke, his voice carried multiple tones, as if several people were speaking through the same throat. What a delightful surprise, the leader said, his eyes, all 3 of them, Obi-Wan noticed with horror, focusing on him. Fresh meat that fights back. The Prince of Pleasure will be so pleased with this offering. He gestured lazily and his followers surged forward. Obi-Wan's lightsaber met their assault with the practiced precision of Form 3. Sora Su, the ultimate defensive technique, perfected by Master Kenobi over decades of warfare. His blade moved in perfect economy, each motion exactly what was needed, and nothing more. Attacks were deflected, weapons were destroyed, the crude bullets they fired were batted aside or melted in midair. Against conventional opponents, the fight would have been over in seconds. But these were not conventional opponents. A cultist took Obi-Wan's blade through the chest, the lightsaber's plasma burning a hole clean through armor, flesh and bone. The man should have died instantly. His heart was gone. Obi-Wan had felt it vaporize under the blade's touch. Instead, the cultist laughed, a sound of pure childlike joy. "Oh yes, that's wonderful," the man giggled, even as blood poured from his mouth. "Do it again. Make it hurt more." He lunged forward, impaling himself further on the blade, trying to grab Obi-Wan's face with hands that ended in crude surgical knives. Obi-Wan was forced to withdraw the saber and sever the man's head entirely. Even then, the body stumbled forward 2 more steps, arms still grasping before finally collapsing. The others pressed in without hesitation. No fear, no self-preservation, just eager, joyous violence. Obi-Wan pushed out with the Force, sending 6 cultists flying into the bulkheads, with enough force to shatter bones. He deflected a spray of gunfire, the crude bullets ricocheting into the attackers' own ranks. He created confusion with subtle Force suggestions, making them strike each other, misread distances, stumble over their own feet. But there were dozens of them, and something was deeply wrong with how the Force responded here. Every technique felt like moving through tar. The effort required was exponentially greater than it should be, and beneath each use of the Force, Obi-Wan felt that vast, screaming presence notice him, turn its attention toward him, begin to understand what he was. A blade scored across his shoulder, crude metal tearing through his robes and drawing blood. Another cultist's axe clipped his thigh, the weapon's edge contaminated with something that made the wound burn like fire. Exhaustion crept in, far faster than it should. His breathing became laboured, his arms grew heavy. The leader watched from the back of the group, head tilted at an angle that suggested his neck was broken. "You're strong, little Jedi. Yes, I can taste what you are, even if I don't understand it. But strength alone won't save you here. This galaxy eats the strong and vomits them back as slaves." Obi-Wan made a decision. He couldn't win this fight, not here, not like this. Retreat was not cowardice, it was tactical necessity. He collapsed the ceiling behind him with a massive force push, creating a barrier of debris and twisted metal. Then he ran, using the Force to enhance his speed, taking turns at random, putting distance between himself and the borders. He found their ship docked to the derelict vessel, a raider craft that looked like a nightmare given form. The hull was covered in profane scripture, written in what he very much feared was blood. Chains hung from its sides, some still bearing withered hands. The very air around it seemed to shimmer with wrongness. But it was his only escape. The remaining crew attacked as he entered, but Obi-Wan had no time for mercy. He used the Force with brutal efficiency, crushed windpipes, slammed bodies into walls with lethal force, forced one man's own weapon to discharge into his face. Within 2 minutes, he'd commandeered the vessel. The controls felt wrong under his hands. They required gestures that seemed ritualistic rather than functional, specific patterns traced in the air, words muttered like prayers, a cut on his palm pressed to a sensor that tasted his blood before allowing access. Obi-Wan engaged the drives, and the raider tore away from the derelict. As the ship's engines powered up, reality seemed to warp around him. The stars outside the viewport weren't quite right. They moved in ways that defied physics, formed constellations that hurt to perceive, pulsed with colours that shouldn't exist. And beneath it all, pressing against his consciousness like a physical weight, Obi-Wan heard laughter. Not from any crew member, not from any living being, from the void itself. A presence vast beyond comprehension noticed him, turned its attention toward him like a searchlight falling on an insect, and found him absolutely delicious. Obi-Wan felt it tasting his Force sensitivity, analysing it, comparing it to something it knew but finding fascinating differences. He was foreign to this place, wrong, an anomaly that shouldn't exist. And anomalies attracted attention. The Jedi Master gripped the controls tighter, pushing the ship to its limits, fleeing through a void that felt hungry in ways space should never be. Behind him, the laughter followed, patient and eternal. He'd escaped the immediate danger, but he had a terrible feeling he'd just painted a target on himself that would never fade. The raider limped through space for hours before Obi-Wan found a planet on the sensors. A civilized world, according to the ship's corrupted cogitator. Sanctum Primus, a forge moon dedicated to manufacturing weapons for something called the Imperium's Eternal Wars. He had no other options. The ship was failing, its systems corrupted by whatever dark presence had inhabited it. Staying aboard any longer felt like inviting madness into his mind. Obi-Wan guided the dying vessel through atmosphere, watching as a world of metal and misery revealed itself below. The entire moon was covered in factories, their smokestacks belching pollution into skies that hadn't been clean in centuries. Hive cities sprawled across the surface like tumors, vertical expanses of habitation and industry built on top of each other until the original ground was buried under miles of human construction. The landing was less controlled crash than barely guided fall. The raider tore through an abandoned industrial sector, carving a trench through rusted metal and forgotten structures before finally coming to rest against the foundation of a massive factory. Obi-Wan pulled himself from the wreckage, using the Force to heal the worst of his injuries. Broken ribs, concussion, burns from where the console had exploded during entry. His robes were torn, covered in blood and oil. He looked like a refugee from a war zone, which, he reflected grimly, was essentially accurate. The air outside smelled of chemicals, burning promethium and something else. Human misery concentrated to the point where it became almost physical. Obi-Wan could feel it pressing against his senses. Thousands upon thousands of lives lived in desperation and ending in exhaustion. He needed information. Needed to understand where he was, what kind of society this represented, how to navigate it safely. Instead, he stumbled into a vision of hell. The main plaza of Sanctum Primus stretched for nearly a kilometre, packed with workers who'd been called from their shifts for what the Voxcasters called a mandatory devotional assembly. Obi-Wan joined the crowd's edges, trying to understand what was happening. Massive furnaces dominated one side of the plaza, their flames already roaring hot enough that Obi-Wan could feel the heat from 100 meters away. Workers in chains, hundreds of them, were being lined up before the fires by enforcers in black armor. A tech priest in red robes stood on a platform, his body more machine than flesh, cables and augments replacing organs with disturbing casualness. When he spoke, his voice was amplified across the plaza by Voxcasters, the sound carrying artificial reverence. By decree of the Administratum, these workers have failed to meet their assigned quotas for 3 consecutive assessment periods. Such failure represents inefficiency. Inefficiency is waste. Waste is heresy against the God Emperor's design. The machine god demands purity. The flesh is weak. The Emperor demands sacrifice. The crowd didn't protest. They chanted in response, their voices carrying desperate fervor. The Emperor protects. The Emperor provides. We are his servants. We accept his judgment. The first group of condemned was pushed toward the furnaces. Obi-Wan watched in mounting horror as they were thrown into the flames while still alive. Their screams were drowned out by the roar of fire and the crowd's prayers. The tech priest recorded each death with mechanical precision, updating production metrics in real time. This wasn't execution. This was industrial processing. Human beings reduced to statistics, their deaths treated with the same emotional investment as scrapping faulty machinery. Obi-Wan had witnessed the Clone Wars. He'd seen battle droids mow down innocents. He'd watched separatist leaders commit atrocities in the name of independence. He'd felt the dark side corrupt good people into monsters, but there was something uniquely horrifying about this bureaucratic evil. This wasn't cruelty born from hatred or madness. This was cruelty systemized, made routine, performed by people who genuinely believed it was righteous. Near him, an old woman collapsed. She'd simply reached the end of her body's ability to continue, malnutrition, exhaustion, and the toxic air combining to shut down her organs. She fell without drama, without sound, just a body giving up. 2 Arbites descended on her immediately. The enforcers were massive, their armor making them look inhuman, their faces hidden behind helmets adorned with Imperial Aquilus and purity seals. Disrupting workflow, one intoned, his voice flat and mechanical through Vox speakers. Imperial Code Violation 773. Penalty, 10 production demerits and corrective discipline. The shock maul struck her across the back, electricity arcing through her barely conscious body. She spasmed, cried out weakly. A young girl, no more than 10 years old, her arms already scarred from factory work, broke from the crowd. "Grandmother, please, she didn't mean to. She's just tired. Please." The second Arbite turned with mechanical precision. Interference with law enforcement duties. Imperial Code Violation 341. Penalty, 15 production demerits and corrective discipline. The shock maul struck the child, sending her sprawling. The crowd didn't react, didn't help. They'd seen this before, would see it again, had learned that intervention only added more victims. Something in Obi-Wan Kenobi broke. He'd spent his entire life as a guardian, a protector, a keeper of peace and defender of those who couldn't defend themselves. He'd watched the Republic fall, had failed to save Anakin from darkness, had seen democracy crumble into tyranny, but he'd also spent years on Tatooine, protecting Luke, maintaining his principles even in exile. He'd promised himself that he would never stop being a Jedi, never stop standing between the innocent and those who would harm them. That promise hadn't changed just because the galaxy had. "That's enough," Obi-Wan said, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the sudden silence that followed the child's cry. The Arbites turned toward him. The crowd drew back, creating space around this fool who dared to challenge authority. "Move along, citizen," the first Arbite said. "This is official Adeptus Arbites business. Non-compliance will result in summary judgment." "I don't think so," Obi-Wan replied, stepping between the enforcers and their victims. His lightsaber ignited, blue light cutting through the polluted air like a beacon. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Someone screamed. The word spread through the plaza like wildfire. Thousands of voices taking it up. Witchcraft. Sorcery. Unsanctioned psyker. Heresy. The Arbites didn't hesitate. They raised their weapons, stubbers loaded with mass-reactive rounds, and opened fire. Obi-Wan's blade moved in perfect defensive arcs. Form 3, Sorasu, the ultimate expression of defensive lightsaber combat. Each shot was deflected or melted mid-flight, the crude bullets no match for a plasma blade wielded by a master. He moved with economy, each motion exactly what was needed, and nothing more. He tried not to kill them. The Arbites were just following orders, enforcing laws they believed were righteous. They didn't deserve death for that. But when the first Arbite drew a power maul and charged, when shock fields crackled around the weapon and the enforcer swung with clear intent to kill, Obi-Wan had no choice. His blade took the man's weapon arm at the elbow. The Arbite screamed, stumbled back. His partner opened fire again, and this time Obi-Wan's deflection sent the rounds back toward the shooter. They struck armor, penetrated, and the second Arbite fell. The third came from behind, silent and professional. Obi-Wan sensed him through the Force, spun, and his blade took the enforcer through the chest. The man died instantly, his augmented heart vaporized. Silence fell over the plaza. 3 Arbites lay dead or dying. The crowd stared at Obi-Wan with expressions mixing terror and something that might have been hope. The tech priest's voice crackled over the voxcasters. Unsanctioned psyker identified. Arbites forces neutralized, initiating emergency protocols. All citizens are ordered to disperse immediately. Failure to comply will be recorded as complicity in heresy. The crowd scattered, thousands of people fleeing in every direction. Obi-Wan grabbed the old woman and the child, using the Force to support their weight, and ran toward the nearest access point to the Underhive. Behind him, sirens wailed. More Arbites would come, perhaps worse than Arbites. He'd just announced his presence in the worst possible way. The descent into the Underhive was a blur of cramped passages and failing infrastructure. Obi-Wan carried the grandmother while the girl led them through routes she knew by heart, the secret ways that Underhive residents used to avoid the authorities. They descended through layers of increasing decay, past habitation blocks where families lived 20 to a room, past factories where workers as young as 6 operated dangerous machinery, past corpse-grinding facilities where the dead were processed into nutrients for the living. Finally, in a section abandoned even by the desperate, in darkness lit only by burning chemical waste, they stopped. The grandmother was weeping, her body shaking with sobs that seemed too large for her frail frame. "You've killed us. You've killed us all. They'll find us. They always find heretics. And they'll make examples of us. My granddaughter will be made into a servitor. Do you understand? They'll cut out her brain and turn her into a machine, because you helped us." The words hit Obi-Wan harder than any weapon. "I couldn't just watch them hurt you." "Why not?" the woman spat. "Everyone else did. Everyone else does. Because that's the way the galaxy works. The Imperium demands suffering. The Emperor demands sacrifice. And we give it, because the alternative is worse. Because beyond the Imperium's borders are things that would eat us alive. Do you understand? This isn't cruelty. This is mercy." Obi-Wan had no answer for that. How did you respond to someone who'd been so thoroughly broken that they defended the system, crushing them? Movement in the shadows made his hand go to his lightsaber, but the Force whispered that these presences weren't hostile. Small figures emerged, stunted humanoids with sharp eyes and shrewd expressions. Rattlings, his mind supplied from somewhere, though he had no idea how he knew the word. The eldest among them, a creature perhaps a meter tall with a face like weathered leather, studied Obi-Wan with disturbing intelligence. "That weapon marks you as Psyker, stranger. Dangerous thing to be, showing power openly where the Inquisition can hear." "I'm not familiar with your terms," Obi-Wan admitted. "I'm new here." The Rattling's eyebrows rose. "New? To Sanctum Primus? To the Imperium? To the galaxy? Where could you possibly be from that you don't know what a Psyker is?" Over the next hours, huddled in the darkness while distant sirens wailed, the Rattlings explained. And with each word, Obi-Wan felt his understanding of reality shift. This galaxy had no Jedi, no Sith, no Republic or Separatists or Clone Wars. All of that was simply absent, as if it had never existed. Instead, there was the Imperium of Man, 10,000 years old, spanning 1,000,000 worlds, ruled by a god emperor who sat dying on a throne of gold while psychic sacrifices sustained his half-life. The Imperium was stagnant, tyrannical, brutal beyond measure, but it was also all that stood between humanity and annihilation. Beyond its borders were the threats: orcs, fungal aliens who existed only for war, tyrannids, extragalactic horrors that consumed all biomass, necrons, ancient machines awakening from eons of sleep, Eldar, dying aliens clinging to the ruins of their empire, and worst of all, chaos, the ruinous powers that dwelt in the warp, a dimension of pure emotion and madness that underlay all reality. Psykers, the Rattlings explained, were humans born with the ability to touch the warp, to draw power from that screaming ocean of emotion. Most went mad. Many were possessed by demons. All were hunted by the Inquisition, an organization with absolute authority to burn, purge, and kill anyone suspected of corruption. Your glowing sword, your tricks with moving things without touching them, that sense you have for danger, all marks of witchery, the eldest Rattling said grimly. The Inquisition will come for you. They always do. Best you run far and fast, stranger. Find a ship off-world. Lose yourself in the Imperium's vastness, because the alternative is a death so terrible you'll beg for the flames. "I can't run," Obi-Wan said quietly. "I don't even know how I got here. I don't know how to get home. And I can't just abandon people who need help." The Rattling stared at him for a long moment, then laughed bitterly. "You're already dead, then. Just don't know it yet." The grandmother spoke up, her voice hoarse. "If you want to help us, stranger, then take my granddaughter and run. Get her off this world before they find her, before they punish her for being near you. That's the only help worth giving. The child, her name was Mira, Obi-Wan learned, clutched her grandmother's hand. "I won't leave you." "You will," the old woman said firmly. "Because I'm dying anyway, child. My lungs are full of factory dust. My organs are failing. I have weeks at most. But you could have years, decades even if you're lucky and careful. So you'll go with a stranger and you'll live and you'll remember your grandmother loved you enough to let you go." The words broke something in Mira. She sobbed, and the sound was so raw that even the rattlings looked away. Obi-Wan knelt beside them both. "I'll protect her, I promise, with my life if necessary." "Promises are cheap," the grandmother said, but she was crying too. "But I suppose they're all we have left." The Inquisition came at dawn. Obi-Wan felt them before he saw them, a presence in the Force that was disciplined, focused, and absolutely certain of its own righteousness. It reminded him uncomfortably of the Jedi Council at its worst, when certainty had replaced wisdom. But this was harder, colder, sharpened by 10,000 years of religious war into something that could cut reality itself. "Come out, witch," a voice called through the Underhive's darkness, amplified by voxcasters. "I am Inquisitor Gregor Eisenhorn of the Ordo Xenos. I know you're here. I can feel your presence like a wound in the world. Surrender now, submit to questioning, and I will grant you the Emperor's mercy. A quick death. Resist, and I will personally ensure your suffering lasts until the stars burn cold." There was no doubt in the voice, no hesitation, just absolute conviction and the authority to enforce it. Obi-Wan stood, leaving Mira with the rattlings. "Stay here. No matter what happens, stay hidden." He emerged into an abandoned manufactorum, vast and echoing. Eisenhorn stood in the center with his retinue arrayed around him, elite soldiers in advanced armor, a figure who radiated psychic energy in ways that made reality ripple, and a scarred warrior carrying a blade that hummed with barely contained power. Eisenhorn himself commanded attention despite being the least physically imposing. He was old, his face a topographic map of scars earned over a century of service. His eyes were hard as diamonds and twice as sharp. He wore a coat of some dark material that seemed to absorb light, and at his hip rested a bolt pistol that looked well used and meticulously maintained. "Remarkable," Eisenhorn said, studying Obi-Wan with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a new specimen. "Your weapon doesn't register on any Imperial database. Xenos technology? Archaeotech from the Dark Age of technology? Or something pulled from the warp itself?" "None of those," Obi-Wan said carefully. "I'm not from your Imperium, Inquisitor. I'm from somewhere very far away. A different galaxy, if I understand my situation correctly. I mean no harm to anyone here." "A different galaxy," Eisenhorn's tone suggested he was humoring a madman. "How fascinating. Tell me, in your travels across galaxies, have you encountered the ruinous powers? Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, the eternal enemies of mankind?" "I've encountered evil," Obi-Wan said, "in many forms. Beings who draw power from suffering, from anger, from fear and hatred. I've fought them. I've seen good people corrupted by them. I've lost people I loved to their influence." "Then you understand why I cannot allow you to live," Eisenhorn said. "Every psyker, no matter how disciplined, no matter how well-intentioned, is a doorway for demons to enter reality. I've seen it happen 1,000 times. Good people who thought they could control their power, who believed themselves strong enough to resist corruption. Every single one failed. Every single one damned themselves, and everyone around them." "I'm not a psyker," Obi-Wan said. "Not as you understand the term. Where I come from, we call it the Force, and it's not the same as your warp." "The Force," Eisenhorn tasted the word. "How poetic. The demons love poetry. They whisper beautiful lies to every psyker who listens. They promise power, knowledge, the ability to change the galaxy for the better. Tell me, stranger, has your Force whispered to you yet? Offered you shortcuts? Suggested that the ends might justify terrible means?" Obi-Wan thought of the dark side, of Anakin's fall, of every temptation he'd faced and resisted. "Yes, and I've refused." "For now," Eisenhorn said, "but time and pressure break everyone. I cannot gamble humanity's survival on your ability to resist forever. You killed 3 Arbites. You wield power without sanction. You carry a weapon of unknown origin. And now you tell me you're from another galaxy, which suggests either delusion or Xenos influence. Any one of those facts would justify your execution. Together, they make it inevitable. Then you'll have to try to execute me, Obi-Wan said quietly, his hand moving to his lightsaber. Because I won't surrender to an unjust system. I've spent my life fighting tyranny, Inquisitor. I won't bow to it now. Eisenhorn's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Respect? Curiosity? You have courage, at least. That's worth noting. Godwin? The scarred warrior stepped forward, drawing his power sword. The blade crackled with energy fields, lightning playing along its length. It will be quick, Inquisitor. He won't suffer. Everyone suffers, Eisenhorn corrected, but let's keep it professional. The fight erupted with sudden, brutal violence. The elite soldiers, tempestuous scions, Obi-Wan would later learn, opened fire with hell guns that burned through the air with far more power than anything the Arbites had carried. Obi-Wan's lightsaber moved in perfect defensive arcs, deflecting the supercharged last bolts, but the sheer volume of fire forced him into constant motion. Godwin Fishig charged with his power sword, screaming. The blade met Obi-Wan's lightsaber with a shriek of energy, and Obi-Wan realized immediately that this man was a master. Not Jedi trained, but refined through decades of actual combat. His technique was brutal but sophisticated, each strike designed to test defenses and create openings for the kill. They fought across the manufactorum floor in a deadly dance, blades meeting in showers of sparks. Fishig was strong, augmented beyond normal human limits, but Obi-Wan had the Force, could sense attacks before they came, could position himself perfectly to deflect rather than block. Then the Psyker attacked. Lightning erupted from the man's hands, not electricity, but something worse, something that felt like the dark side made manifest and multiplied 1,000-fold. The energy was tainted, wrong, burning with colors that shouldn't exist. When it struck Obi-Wan's hasty force barrier, the impact felt like being punched by pure hatred. The barrier held for 3 seconds. Then it shattered. Obi-Wan screamed as the warp lightning tore through him. Every nerve in his body fired at once. His muscles spasmed, locked, released. His vision went white. He collapsed, barely maintaining consciousness, his lightsaber dropping from nerveless fingers. Through the haze of agony he heard whispers. Familiar whispers from the Chaos ship, from the void between stars. They'd followed him here, been waiting for this moment of weakness. They offered power, strength through anger, victory through hatred, freedom through domination. Just embrace the darkness, and all this pain would become fuel for vengeance. He could kill these fools, could burn this entire world, could remake this galaxy in his image, force it to be better whether it wanted to or not. The temptation was strong, stronger than it had ever been before, because the galaxy genuinely deserved it. The Imperium was evil, its people were complicit. Burning it all down would be justice, wouldn't it? No, Obi-Wan gasped through clenched teeth. He reached deep into the Force, past the pain, past the fear, past the rage that whispered promises of power. He found the core of light that had defined him since childhood, the conviction that had survived Anakin's fall, the Empire's rise, decades of exile, the absolute certainty that some things were worth defending, even when, especially when the galaxy made that defense nearly impossible. The whispers recoiled like snakes from fire. With an effort that felt like lifting a planet, Obi-Wan pushed himself to his feet, his hand extended, and his lightsaber flew back to his grip. The blue blade ignited, somehow seeming brighter now. Fishig was already moving in for the kill. Obi-Wan redirected the power sword with his blade, then used the Force to collapse a section of ceiling between them. Debris crashed down, creating a barrier and buying precious seconds. The Scions were repositioning, their training showing in how they covered each other's movements. Obi-Wan grabbed a piece of reflective metal with the Force and angled it, sending their next volley of hellgun fire back toward them. 2 went down, the others scattered. Eisenhorn aimed his bolt pistol with mechanical precision. The weapon roared, firing rounds that exploded on impact with devastating force. Obi-Wan deflected what he could, dove behind machinery for the rest. Shrapnel tore through his robes, cutting shallow wounds across his arms and legs. The Psyker was gathering power for another attack, reality rippling around him as he drew on the warp. Obi-Wan could feel it building, could sense the moment before release. He threw his lightsaber. The blade spun through the air, a wheel of blue light. The Psyker's eyes widened in shock. He tried to shield himself, but the lightsaber cut through his hastily erected barriers like they were paper. The blade took him through the chest and he collapsed without a sound. Obi-Wan called the saber back to his hand as Fishig burst through the debris barrier, roaring in rage. The warrior struck with abandon now, grief and fury making him reckless. Obi-Wan deflected 3 strikes, redirected the 4th into machinery that exploded, showering them both with sparks. Fishig stumbled, blinded. Obi-Wan used the Force to disarm him, the power sword flying from his grip. Then he pushed, and the warrior slammed into a wall hard enough to crack the concrete. He slumped, unconscious. That left Eisenhorn. The Inquisitor stood calmly, bolt pistol aimed with unwavering steadiness. Impressive. You killed my Psyker, defeated Godwin, which very few can claim. But you're wounded, exhausted, and I have 100 more scions aboard my ship. You cannot win this. I don't need to win, Obi-Wan said, breathing hard. I just need to escape. To what end? I know your face now. I know your abilities. The Inquisition will hunt you across the galaxy. There is nowhere you can hide that we won't eventually find you. So why prolong the inevitable? Because every day I remain free is another day I can help people. Another day the Imperium doesn't get to decide who lives and dies based on whether they meet quotas or express the wrong thoughts. That's worth fighting for. Eisenhorn was silent for a long moment. Then to Obi-Wan's surprise, he lowered his bolt pistol. You truly believe that, don't you? You genuinely think one person can make a difference in a galaxy this broken? I've seen it happen before, Obi-Wan said. I've seen a single act of compassion change everything. I've seen hope survive in places where it should have died. So yes, I believe it. I have to. Then you're either the bravest person I've ever met, Eisenhorn said quietly, or the most delusional. I genuinely can't tell which, but... He holstered his pistol. You've earned something rare, stranger. You've made me uncertain, and I've learned over a century of service that uncertainty means I'm missing information. So I'm going to do something unprecedented. He gestured, and the remaining scions lowered their weapons. I'm letting you go, not out of mercy, understand that clearly, but because I need to know what you are, what you represent, whether you're humanity's potential salvation or eventual damnation. You've done something I've never seen before. You resisted chaos corruption in a moment of absolute vulnerability. That shouldn't be possible. The fact that it is means everything I know about Psykers might be incomplete. Obi-Wan stared at him. You're serious. I never joke, Eisenhorn said, but understand this. I will be watching. Every move you make, every word you speak, every person you influence. And the moment I determine you're a threat to humanity's survival, I will end you personally. Is that clear? Perfectly, Obi-Wan said. Then go. Take whatever refugees you've collected and disappear into the Imperium's vastness. Teach your philosophy if you must. Practice your strange techniques, but know that I'm watching, always watching. Eisenhorn turned to leave, then paused. One more thing. That technique you used when resisting the warp lightning. What was it? I've never felt anything like it. Jedi discipline, Obi-Wan said. Letting go of emotion without suppressing it. Becoming a clear vessel for the Force rather than trying to control it. It's difficult to explain. Try, Eisenhorn said, because if that technique can be taught, if it can help Psykers resist chaos corruption, it might be worth more than any weapon in the Imperium's arsenal. Obi-Wan met his eyes. Then perhaps we're not enemies after all, Inquisitor. Perhaps we both want the same thing, to protect people from the darkness. We just have very different ideas about how to accomplish that. Perhaps, Eisenhorn said, but I've lived 150 years, stranger. I've seen every good intention pave a road to damnation. If you prove different, you'll be the first. Don't make me regret giving you the chance. Then he was gone, his retinue following, leaving Obi-Wan alone in the ruined manufactorum. The Jedi Master collapsed against a wall, finally allowing his wounds to demand attention. He was bleeding from a dozen cuts, his body ached from the warp lightning, and his connection to the Force felt strained nearly to breaking. But he was alive, free, and he had a chance. That would have to be enough. The pilgrim ship Eternal Devotion departed Sanctum Primus 3 days later, carrying nearly 2,000 refugees fleeing the Orc invasion. Among them was Obi-Wan Kenobi, travelling under the name Ben, protecting a young girl named Mira, and drawing the interest of a handful of other unsanctioned psychers who'd felt what he did during his confrontation with the Inquisition. One of them, a woman in her 20s with haunted eyes and barely controlled power, sat across from him in the cramped transport hold. "I'm Elena Varel," she said, without preamble. "I felt you when you fought the Inquisitor. Felt you use the warp, but differently. Like it didn't hurt you. Like you were friends with it instead of being consumed by it." "How?" Obi-Wan studied her carefully. She was desperate. He could sense that clearly. Desperate for any answer, any hope that she might not be doomed to madness or death. "I don't use the warp," he said finally. "Where I come from, we call it the Force. And while they seem to be connected here, they're not identical. The Force is an energy field created by all living things. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. Light and dark exist within it, but they're not separate powers. They're choices about how to use the same energy." Elena leaned forward. "Explain." Over the next hours, as the ship broke atmosphere and headed toward the void, Obi-Wan explained the Jedi philosophy. He spoke of the light side, compassion, selflessness, serenity, the choice to serve rather than dominate. He described the dark side, fear, anger, hatred, the temptation to control through force. He outlined the Jedi Code, the principles that had guided him for decades. "There is no emotion, there is peace," he recited. "There is no ignorance, there is knowledge. There is no passion, there is serenity. There is no chaos, there is harmony. There is no death, there is the Force." Elena listened with an expression caught between wonder and skepticism. When he finished, she shook her head slowly. "That's beautiful, truly. It sounds like paradise. But it's impossible here. The warp isn't some neutral energy field. It's emotion given form. Every feeling, every thought, every passion and nightmare given eternal existence in that screaming dimension. Anger doesn't just give you power. It summons demons of Khorne. Fear doesn't just weaken you. It feeds Tzeentch. Your light side sounds like denial. Like trying to pretend the fundamental nature of reality is something other than what it is. Or perhaps, Obi-Wan said gently, it's choosing what we become rather than accepting what others tell us we must be. Yes, the warp responds to emotion. Yes, anger and fear have power here. But that doesn't mean we're slaves to them. We still have choice. That's the one thing no force in the universe can take from us, unless we surrender it. Choice, Eleanor repeated bitterly. I've never had choice. I was born with this curse. The moment my abilities manifested, I became hunted. All my life has been hiding, running, watching everyone I care about die or turn me in for the bounty. Where's the choice in that? The choice isn't in what happens to you, Obi-Wan said. It's in how you respond. You could have given in to hatred, could have used your power to hurt those who hurt you, could have embraced the chaos gods who whisper promises. But you didn't. You chose to hide, to survive, to protect yourself without destroying others. That's a choice too. And it's a brave one. Eleanor stared at him for a long moment. I want to believe you. I want to believe that all of this, the fear, the hiding, the constant awareness that I'm one mistake away from demonic possession, that it means something, that there's a reason to keep resisting. But hope is dangerous here. Hope gets you killed. Hope is all we have, Obi-Wan countered. Without it, we're already dead. We're just waiting for our bodies to catch up. Before Elena could respond, reality shuddered. Every psyker on the ship felt it simultaneously, a massive presence pushing against the barrier between the warp and reality. Something vast and hungry had noticed the ship, noticed the unusual concentration of psychic potential aboard, and decided to investigate. The breach appeared in the ship's primary cargo hold, Reality tore open like flesh under a knife, colours bleeding into the material world that shouldn't exist, sounds that made ears bleed just to process them. Through the wound came laughter, the same laughter Obi-Wan had heard aboard the Chaos ship, but closer now, more focused, more interested. The demon manifested as fractals of madness given form. It wore geometry that hurt to perceive directly, angles that intersected in ways that violated physics. Its voice came from everywhere and nowhere, speaking directly into the minds of everyone aboard. Obi-Wan Kenobi, the anomaly, the foreign note in Tzeentch's eternal symphony. I have travelled far to meet you, little Jedi, to taste your fascinating differences, to understand what you are. The demon's mere presence corrupted reality. Refugees began to scream as their bodies twisted, mutations rippling through flesh in response to the warp's touch. Elena collapsed beside Obi-Wan, extra eyes opening across her arms, her skin splitting to accommodate growths that pulsed with their own horrible life. Throughout the ship, other psychers convulsed as the daemon's attention touched them. Some burst into flame, others melted into puddles of screaming biomass. A few simply ceased to exist, reality rejecting their presence. "Do you see?" the demon crooned. "Do you understand? You are wrong here, Jedi. The warp knows you don't belong. It tries to correct the error, and the correction is always fatal, unless..." It leaned closer, though it had no true physical form. "Unless you embrace me. Let me teach you the truth of this galaxy. Accept Tzeentch's blessing, and I will show you how to not just survive here, but to thrive. You could save everyone on this ship, everyone on every ship. You could change this galaxy, remake it according to your precious Jedi principles. All the power you need, freely given. All I ask in return is that you stop fighting what you are. Stop resisting the warp's truth. Accept that emotion is not weakness, but strength." For one terrible moment, Obi-Wan was tempted, because the demon was right about one thing. He could save them. If he embraced the dark side, or the warp, or whatever it was called here, he could burn this demon out of existence, could force the Imperium to be better, could reshape this entire galaxy through sheer will. It would be tyranny, well-intentioned tyranny, but tyranny nonetheless. He'd become everything the Jedi Order had stood against, everything Anakin had become. But wasn't tyranny justified if it ended suffering? Wasn't domination acceptable if it created peace? Hadn't the Jedi's refusal to take control directly contributed to the Republic's fall? "No," Obi-Wan said quietly. The demon tilted its impossible head. "No? Such conviction, such certainty. But look around you, Jedi. These people are dying, transforming, becoming things that will wish for death but never find it. You could stop this with a word, with a single choice. Why do you hesitate?" "Because saving them by becoming a monster makes their salvation meaningless," Obi-Wan said, his voice gaining strength. "Free will matters. Choice matters. If I force this galaxy to be better, I'm no different than the Imperium forcing it to be worse. The method is the same. Domination, control, the denial of individual agency. And that road leads only to tyranny, no matter how noble the initial intention." "Then watch them die," the demon said. "Watch them transform. Know that you could have prevented this and chose not to. Live with that knowledge for whatever brief time remains to you." The demon's power exploded outward. The mutations accelerated. Elena's entire body began to writhe, her form becoming fluid, losing definition. Throughout the cargo hold, refugees screamed as they were twisted into new configurations of flesh and suffering. Obi-Wan stood in the center of the horror, his lightsaber ignited but useless. How did you fight something that existed partially outside reality? How did you combat an enemy that fed on aggression, that grew stronger from every attack? He couldn't fight the demon directly. Every Jedi combat technique he knew required will, determination, the desire to defeat an enemy, all of which would empower the demon, give it more purchase in reality. So Obi-Wan did something he'd rarely attempted, something so difficult that even Qui-Gon had only managed it once, at the moment of his death. He let go, not of the Force, of everything else. Fear for the refugees, anger at the demon, hatred for the injustice of this galaxy, the desire to win, to save, to succeed. He released it all, every attachment, every emotion, every want and need and hope. In that moment of complete emptiness, he became nothing but a vessel, a clear channel for the Force itself. And through him, the Force flowed. It wasn't an attack. It wasn't even a defense in any conventional sense. It was simply stillness, the quiet at the center of the storm, the moment between heartbeats where nothing exists but infinite potential. The wave of perfect serenity rippled outward from Obi-Wan like a stone dropped in perfectly calm water. Where it touched, the warp recoiled, not because it was being forced back, but because it found nothing to grip, no emotion to feed on, no passion to amplify, just absolute perfect calm. The demon shrieked, "What are you doing? Stop! You're making holes in the music, creating silence in the eternal symphony. This is wrong. This is impossible. The warp is everywhere. The warp is everything. You cannot create absence." But Obi-Wan could. Because the Force, in its purest form, existed before emotion, before thought, before the division into light and dark. It was the underlying truth beneath all the noise, and here, for just a moment, he was showing this galaxy what that truth looked like. The mutations stopped, reversed. Elena's extra eyes closed and vanished, her skin knitting itself back together. Throughout the cargo hold, other psychers felt it. A moment of pure, blessed silence in their tortured minds. No whispers, no temptations, no screaming from the void. Just peace. Other psychers aboard the ship, driven by desperate hope, reached out to join their will to his. They didn't understand what they were doing, couldn't replicate the technique, but they felt the possibility, the proof that another way existed. For the first time in their lives, they experienced their power without the warp's corruption. It felt like coming home to a place they'd never been. Together they pushed, not with force, but with absence, with the creation of space where the warp could not reach. The demon's connection to reality weakened, its impossible form flickering and destabilizing. "This changes nothing," it screamed. "You've won a single battle, Jedi, but the warp is eternal. Chaos is inevitable. We will find you again. We will..." The breach sealed. The demon was expelled back into the screaming ocean from which it came. Reality reasserted itself with an almost audible snap. Then Obi-Wan collapsed. Blood poured from his nose, his ears, his eyes. Every blood vessel in his body felt on the verge of bursting. His connection to the Force was barely a whisper, the strain of what he'd done nearly severing it completely. He lay on the cold deck, unable to move, barely able to breathe, consciousness flickering, and found himself looking up at Inquisitor Eisenhorn. The Inquisitor stood over him, bolt pistol drawn but not aimed. His expression was complex, a mixture of awe, fear, calculation, and something that might have been hope. "You banished it," Eisenhorn said slowly. "A greater demon of Tzeentch. You banished it without violence, without destruction, without calling on the Emperor's power, or using sanctioned techniques. You simply created a space where it couldn't exist." "How?" Obi-Wan tried to answer, but his voice wouldn't work. Blood bubbled at his lips. His vision was going dark at the edges. Elena pushed forward, placing herself between Obi-Wan and the Inquisitor. Her voice shook, but her resolve was clear. "He told you the truth. Everything he said was true. His power. The Force, he calls it. It's not the warp. Or it is, but he uses it differently. Without corruption. Without madness. He proved it. We all felt it." "Nothing uses the warp without corruption," Eisenhorn said, but his tone lacked conviction. "Every psyker falls eventually. Every sanctioned psychic technique carries risk. But that..." He gestured to where the demon had been. "I've fought demons for 150 years. I've seen every banishment technique the Imperium possesses. Holy wards, Geller fields, psychic nullification, even sacrificial rituals. But I've never seen anything like that. You didn't fight it. You simply existed in a way that made its existence impossible, as if you were showing reality what it should be instead of what it is. Eisenhorn's bound psyker stepped forward, tears streaming down his ravaged face. The man had served the Inquisitor for decades, his mind scarred by constant exposure to the warp. But his voice carried wonder. For just a moment, Lord Inquisitor, the voices stopped. Completely stopped. No whispers, no temptations, no screaming. Just quiet. I didn't know quiet was possible anymore. I thought I'd lost that forever when the black ships took me, but he showed all of us, that we're not doomed, that there might be another way. Eisenhorn was silent for a long moment, studying Obi-Wan's barely conscious form. Finally, he holstered his bolt pistol. You've earned something precious, Jedi. You've given me doubt. Real, genuine doubt about whether everything the Imperium teaches about psykers is complete. And after a century and a half of service, that kind of doubt means I'm missing critical information. He knelt beside Obi-Wan. So, I'm going to make you an offer. Join my retinue. Work under my supervision. Teach your technique to sanctioned psykers who can be trusted not to fall to chaos. Help me understand whether this force of yours represents a genuine alternative to the Imperium's methods, or just a slower path to damnation. Do this, and you'll have my protection, the full authority of the Inquisition standing between you and every other threat in the galaxy. Obi-Wan found his voice, weak but clear. And if I refuse, then I let you go, Eisenhorn said. But I watch. Every moment, every action, every person you influence. And the moment I determine you're a threat, the moment your presence causes more harm than good, I will end you personally. No mercy, no hesitation, no second chances. Is that clear? Perfectly, Obi-Wan whispered. And I refuse. I won't serve tyranny, Inquisitor. Not yours, not anyone's. I've spent my life as a guardian, not a weapon. I won't compromise that now, even to save my own life. Eisenhorn stood, his expression unreadable. You're a fool. Perhaps, Obi-Wan agreed. But I'm a fool who keeps his principles, even here. Especially here. For a moment, Obi-Wan thought the Inquisitor might execute him anyway. Eisenhorn's hand drifted toward his bolt pistol, and the Scions raised their hellguns slightly. Then Elena spoke again. You kill him, and you kill hope. Real hope. Not the empty promises the Imperium feeds us. He proved something today. Proved that psykers can be more than victims waiting to become monsters. That we have choice. That we can resist without being lobotomized or sacrificed. You execute that proof. You execute us all. The other refugees pressed forward, forming a human barrier between Eisenhorn and Obi-Wan. They were unarmed, exhausted, terrified, but they stood their ground, because for the first time in their lives, they'd seen an alternative to the Imperium's cruelty. They'd felt a moment of peace in a galaxy that had forgotten the word's meaning. Eisenhorn looked at them for a long moment, then to everyone's surprise he turned to leave. You've convinced me of one thing, he said over his shoulder, that I don't have enough information to make a final judgment. So I'm giving you time, Jedi. Time to prove whether you're humanity's salvation or its damnation. But know this. The Imperium spans 1,000,000 worlds. There is nowhere you can hide that I won't eventually find you. And when we meet again, I will have my answer. Pray to whatever God you believe in that the answer favors your survival. He paused at the doorway. One last thing. That technique you used, teach it. To as many psykers as you can reach. Because if it genuinely allows resistance to chaos corruption, it's worth more than any weapon in the Imperium's arsenal. But if it fails, if even one person you teach falls to demons, their damnation will be on your head. Live with that responsibility. Then he was gone, his retinue following. The cargo hold fell silent except for the sound of refugees weeping in relief. Elena knelt beside Obi-Wan, helping him sit up, supporting him as his body trembled from exhaustion. You should have taken his offer, she said quietly. The Inquisition's protection would have kept you safe, let you actually accomplish something instead of constantly running. At the cost of everything I believe in, Obi-Wan replied. Some prices are too high, Elena. The moment I start serving power structures, even to change them from within, I become complicit in their crimes. I won't do that. Not again. She shook her head in wonder. You're going to get yourself killed, you know that? This galaxy eats idealists and spits out their bones. Probably, Obi-Wan agreed with a faint smile. But I've been killed before. I seem to be quite bad at staying dead. The journey to the Eastern Fringe took 3 standard weeks. The Eternal Devotion travelled through the warp, a journey that Obi-Wan found deeply disturbing, feeling that screaming ocean of madness pressing against the ship's Gellerfields like a living thing that desperately wanted inside. But in those weeks, something remarkable happened. Word spread through the ship about what Obi-Wan had done. Refugees who'd felt that moment of perfect peace sought him out, asking questions, begging to understand. Other unsanctioned psychers aboard, and there were more than a dozen hiding among the pilgrims, came to him with desperate hope in their eyes. Teach us, they said. Show us how to resist without being destroyed. Give us what you gave Elena. Obi-Wan was reluctant at first. Teaching Jedi techniques to untrained individuals was dangerous under the best circumstances. Here, where the Force and warp seemed to overlap in ways he didn't fully understand, it could be catastrophic. But he couldn't refuse people who were drowning and begging for a lifeline. So he taught them. Not advanced techniques, those would be far too dangerous without proper foundation, but principles, philosophy, the mental discipline that underpinned all Jedi training. There is no emotion, there is peace, he would begin each lesson. This doesn't mean suppressing emotion, it means not being controlled by it. You feel anger, acknowledge it, understand its source, then let it flow through you and away. Don't cling to it. Don't build identity around it. Just let it be and let it go. Eleanor became his most dedicated student, soaking up every word. She'd spent her entire life terrified of her own power, convinced that one wrong thought would doom her to possession. The idea that power could be wielded safely, that emotions didn't have to be chains, was revolutionary. How do you do it? She asked one evening as they sat in a quiet corner of the ship, watching the warp's madness swirl beyond the viewports. How do you stay calm when everything around you is terrible? Don't you feel anger at the Imperium? Hatred for what they do to people? Fear that you'll fail? Of course I do, Obi-Wan said. I'm not emotionless, Elena. I feel everything you do. Anger, fear, grief, frustration. But I don't let those feelings control me. There's a difference between feeling anger and being angry. Between experiencing fear and being afraid. Do you understand? Not really, she admitted. Obi-Wan thought for a moment. When you touch the warp, how does it feel? Like drowning, Elena said immediately. Like being pulled underwater by a current stronger than I am. Like if I let go for even a second, I'll be swept away and lost forever. That's because you're fighting it, Obi-Wan said. You're trying to control something too vast to control. But the Force, and perhaps the warp, I'm still learning the differences, isn't meant to be controlled. It's meant to be channeled. Think of it like a river. You can't stop a river. You can't force it to flow backward, but you can build a mill. You can use its power. You can work with it, rather than against it. That sounds nice in theory, Elena said. But the warp isn't just a river. It has intention. It wants things. The Chaos Gods are real, actual beings with plans and desires. How do you channel something that's actively trying to corrupt you? By not giving it anything to corrupt, Obi-Wan said. The dark side, and I suspect chaos works similarly, feeds on specific emotions. Fear, anger, hatred, the desire for power. If you don't carry those things, if you let them flow through you rather than clinging to them, there's nothing for the darkness to grab onto. You become like water passing through a sieve, present but untouchable. Eleanor stared at him. That's actually helpful. More helpful than anything the Imperium ever taught. They just say, don't use your power, or only use it exactly as we tell you, or accept that you're damned, and be grateful we lobotomize you instead of executing you. They never explained how to actually live with it. Because the Imperium doesn't trust its people, Obi-Wan said. It rules through fear and religious fervour. The idea that individuals might be trusted to make their own choices, to resist corruption through personal discipline rather than external control, that's heresy to them. Because if people don't need the Imperium to save them from themselves, the Imperium loses its justification for tyranny. By the time the eternal devotion reached its destination, a shrine world called Quiet Vale in the Eastern Fringe, Obi-Wan had nearly 60 followers. Not all were psychers. Some were just refugees who'd been touched by his message, who'd glimpsed the possibility that life might be lived differently than the Imperium demanded. They disembarked onto a world that was, for the first time since Obi-Wan's arrival, genuinely peaceful. Quiet Vale was dedicated to contemplation and meditation, its inhabitants monks of various imperial cults who spent their days in prayer and study. The planet welcomed pilgrims without demanding tithes or proof of productivity. It was as close to sanctuary as this galaxy offered. Obi-Wan's followers gathered in a grove of alien trees, their purple bark and golden leaves creating a canopy that filtered the setting sun into jeweled light. They sat in a circle around him, their faces eager and afraid in equal measure. "What you're asking to learn," Obi-Wan said slowly, "isn't easy. It requires discipline, patience, and a willingness to face your own darkness without being consumed by it. The techniques I can teach won't make you powerful in ways the Imperium values. They won't help you destroy enemies or conquer worlds, but they might make you free." "Free from what?" one of the younger students asked. "From the chains we put on ourselves," Obi-Wan replied. "Fear, anger, hatred, despair. This galaxy tells you those emotions define you, that they're all you can ever be. The Imperium says you're broken, that you need to be controlled or destroyed. The Chaos Gods say you're already damned, that you might as well embrace corruption. I'm here to tell you that all of that is a lie." He stood, and for the first time since arriving in this nightmare galaxy, he felt something like peace, not contentment. There was too much suffering, too much injustice for that. But purpose, direction, the sense that he was exactly where he needed to be. His lightsaber ignited, casting blue light across the gathered faces. "This isn't the Republic," Obi-Wan said. "There's no Senate to protect, no democracy to preserve, no Jedi Order to rebuild. But there are still people suffering, still innocents who deserve better, still a choice between light and darkness. And as long as that choice exists, there's work to do." The Force whispered through him, faint but present, affirming, promising that even here, even in the 41st millennium where hope was considered heresy, the light could survive. "What do we call ourselves?" Elena asked from her place in the circle. "We're not Jedi. We don't have your training or your connection to the Force. We're just people, trying to be better in a galaxy that punishes the attempt." Obi-Wan smiled. "Then perhaps that's what we are. Not Jedi, not Imperial citizens, not even rebels against the Imperium. Just people choosing every single day to be better than what the universe expects. Guardians of that choice, protectors of the light in a galaxy that's forgotten its value." "The Guardians?" Elena repeated, testing the name. Then more firmly, "The Guardians. I like it. It's not presumptuous, doesn't claim we're superior or chosen or special. Just says we're trying to protect something worth protecting." Around the circle, the others nodded. In their eyes, Obi-Wan saw something he'd feared he might never find in this place. Genuine hope. Not the desperate, brittle hope of people clinging to fantasies, but real, grounded hope born from seeing an alternative proven possible. It wouldn't be enough. 60 people couldn't change an imperium of trillions, couldn't stop the wars, couldn't end the tyranny, couldn't save everyone who needed saving. But it was a start. And in a galaxy where starting seemed impossible, even that was a revolution. High above Quiet Vale, Inquisitor Eisenhorn stood on the bridge of his ship, watching sensor readings with an expression that concealed the war raging behind his eyes. His bound psyker stood beside him, studying the same readings with an expression of undisguised wonder. "He's teaching them, Lord Inquisitor. Actually teaching them his techniques. And it's working. I can feel it even from orbit. Psychers touching the warp without the usual corruption. It's subtle, barely there, but it's real. I know, Eisenhorn said quietly. This changes everything. If his techniques can be replicated, if we can train psychers to resist chaos without lobotomization or sanctioning rituals, the implications are... I know, Eisenhorn repeated, his voice harder. Which is exactly why this is so dangerous. The Imperium's entire structure regarding psychers is based on the assumption that they cannot be trusted to resist corruption without external control. If that assumption is false, if individuals can learn to resist through discipline alone, then what justification remains for the black ships, for the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, for the feeding of 10,000 psychers daily to sustain the Emperor? The psycher fell silent, understanding dawning in his scarred eyes. It would undermine everything. It would prove that we've been wrong for 10,000 years, Eisenhorn said. That we've been lobotomizing, executing and sacrificing people who could have been saved. The guilt of that revelation would tear the Imperium apart. Worse, it would give psychers hope of independence. They'd stop cooperating with the black ships. They'd resist sanctioning. The entire system would collapse. So, what do we do? The psycher asked. Eisenhorn was silent for a long moment, watching the grove below where Obi-Wan taught his first lesson. We watch, we gather data, we verify whether his technique genuinely works or whether it's simply a slower path to damnation, and when I have enough information to make a final judgment, yes, Lord Inquisitor? Then I'll decide whether Obi-Wan Kenobi represents humanity's salvation or its greatest threat, and if it's the latter, I'll do my duty no matter what it cost me personally. But even as he said it, Eisenhorn knew something had changed. He'd spent 150 years absolutely certain of his purpose, unwavering in his conviction that the Imperium's methods, however brutal, were necessary for survival. Now, for the first time, he wasn't sure, and uncertainty in an Inquisitor was more dangerous than any demon. On Quiet Vale, the lesson continued deep into the night. Obi-Wan taught them meditation techniques, showing them how to find stillness within chaos. He explained the difference between suppressing emotion and releasing it. He demonstrated how to touch the Force, or the warp the terms were confusing here, without being consumed by it. It was difficult. Most of his students struggled to achieve even the most basic state of calm. The warp fought them, whispered to them, tried to convince them that resistance was futile. But they tried, and trying was what mattered. As the planet's twin moons rose overhead, casting silver light across the grove, Elena managed something remarkable. She touched the warp. Obi-Wan could feel her do it, and for 3 full seconds, she maintained perfect calm. The power flowed through her without corruption, without the usual screaming presence of chaos. Just clean energy, responsive to her will, shaped by discipline rather than passion. Then she lost it, the connection snapping as fear crept back in. But those 3 seconds were proof. Genuine, undeniable proof. She opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. I did it! I actually did it! For just a moment, I wasn't afraid, wasn't fighting, just... was. And the power was there, not trying to hurt me, not demanding anything. Just there. The other students surrounded her, their questions tumbling over each other. Could she do it again? How did it feel? What was different? Could they learn it too? Obi-Wan watched them with a mixture of pride and deep concern, because he knew what Elena didn't yet understand. She'd just painted a target on herself that would never fade. The moment she used that technique openly, the moment anyone with authority witnessed it, questions would be asked that had no good answers. But that was a problem for tomorrow. Tonight, they'd proven something important. That change was possible, that the Imperium's certainties weren't as absolute as they claimed, that individuals had power the system didn't want them to know about. Tonight, they'd lit a candle in the darkness, and in the 41st millennium, where hope was heresy and compassion was weakness, even the smallest light was an act of revolution. Obi-Wan stood, walking to the edge of the grove to look up at unfamiliar stars. He thought of Anakin, of Padme, of the Republic he'd failed to save. He thought of everything he'd lost, everything that had been taken from him by circumstance and fate and his own failures. But he also thought of the refugees he'd saved, the child, Mira, sleeping safely nearby, Eleanor, who'd touched the Force without fear for the first time in her life, 60 people who now knew that another way existed. It wasn't enough, would never be enough, but it was something, and something was better than nothing. His lightsaber ignited one last time that night, its blue glow defiant against the darkness of the 41st Millennium. The Force whispered through him, faint, strained, but undeniably present, affirming his choice, promising that even here, even in this broken galaxy, the light could survive. He was still a Jedi, perhaps the last Jedi, but still a guardian, still a protector, still standing between the innocent and the darkness. "I won't abandon my principles," he said quietly to the stars. "Not for safety, not for acceptance, not even to save my own life. The Jedi way means something. Peace, justice, compassion. They mean something. And I'll prove it. Even here, especially here." The Force answered with warmth and affirmation. Somewhere in the darkness, Obi-Wan knew Eisenhorn was watching, judging, preparing to make a decision that would determine whether this fragile beginning survived or was crushed before it could grow. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, 60 people slept, believing that change was possible, that they weren't doomed, that hope wasn't heresy but reality, and in a galaxy that had spent 10,000 years trying to kill hope, that belief alone was worth dying to protect. Case file 17 Gamma remains open. The subject known as Obi-Wan Kenobi was last sighted on Quiet Vale, operating outside Imperial jurisdiction. Inquisitorial reports suggest he's building a network, small, hidden, but growing. His followers call themselves Guardians, and they practice techniques unknown to the Imperium's psychic disciplines. Inquisitor Eisenhorn has classified the subject as Asset Threat Designation Amber, neither fully heretical nor sanctioned, simply unprecedented. Initial reports suggest his technique for resisting warp corruption may be genuine. 3 unsanctioned psychers taught by the subject have demonstrated brief periods of psychic manipulation without the usual taint of chaos. Duration ranges from 3 to 7 seconds before traditional corruption patterns reassert themselves. This represents a statistical anomaly requiring further investigation. Whether the subject represents humanity's salvation or eventual damnation remains undetermined. Long-term observation has been authorized. Termination protocols are prepared but not yet enacted. The 41st Millennium has never encountered anything quite like a Jedi Knight. Historical analysis suggests such individuals once existed during the dark age of technology. Though records are fragmentary and unreliable, whether this represents a return of lost knowledge or the emergence of a new threat remains to be seen. One thing is certain, the galaxy will never be quite the same. Subscribe for more case files. The truth is always waiting in the shadows, and some truths change everything.